There is no question in the mind of any member of the commission that these things are true. And yet Senator Russell is saying, you have to put a little footnote in there, Chief Justice Warren, that Senator Russell dissents to these things. Hello and welcome back to my channel. And if you're new, then welcome. I'm Jess, Connell, and I would love to earn your subscription with this video, which I think is number 40 in our walkthrough of the JFK assassination through a variety of literature. This is the one we're doing today. Well, in this episode, what we are going to be reading about is the deceit of Warren Commission members. Last time we talked about how the investigation was done, about how many of them attended a various average session of the Warren Commission, and how few there actually were. So we're told, there's 544 eyewitnesses that were called. Well, only 94 of those actually gave testimony before the 7 members of the commission. And out of 49, only 49 meetings where at least one of the 7 members was present, out of those meetings, there were 94 testimonies. And on average, the commission members attended 45% of those testimonies. So each commission member is only getting a small fraction of the actual evidence and testimonies that were given before the Warren Commission. So even our impression of what happened with the Warren Commission, we learned was completely wrong. Not only that, but then the printing of the documents itself of that Warren Commission report was handled primarily by 2 men, neither of whom were those 7 members. Instead, it was staff members who were writing and rewriting, furiously rewriting chapters, trying to put together information. And in the end, the man who did the final edit had less than a week to do it. So he said, basically, I'm not able to do an adequate rewrite. I mean, I would need 6 months if it was going to be a good edit. So that is what the American people were given, a slipshod investigation that withheld much information, where even the commission members didn't actually interact with the majority of the testimony given, much less the evidence that was a larger body than those 49 days with 94 witnesses. Well, today what we're going to get into is that the commission actually deceived its own dissenting members. That is the title of chapter 21 in Harold Weisberg's book, Never Again. Harold Weisberg was one of the early generation of JFK assassination researchers. I actually have 4 of his books right down here. Whitewash, Whitewash 2, Whitewash 3, and the photographic whitewash. This is a larger book called Never Again. And the interesting thing about those books is that he couldn't find a publisher who would publish them. And so he just typed it out on his typewriter and essentially did some self-writing and self-publishing, which was very forward-thinking at that time. His books sold incredibly well. And Robert Groden, who now is a friend of mine, has shared with me how pivotal Harold Weisberg's books were for him. Not only that, but not just his books. Robert called up Harold Weisberg, and Harold said, come on down, let's talk. And so they would spend time together in person, and Harold invested in that next generation of researchers. So I have great respect for Harold Weisberg. I've listened to a few of his interviews, but he's one of those people that if I see information from him, I know that I should look into it because of how highly, not just Robert Groden, but others reference his work. So this book is Never Again by Harold Weisberg. It says, the FBI says Harold Weisberg knows more about the Kennedy assassination than the FBI itself. In Never Again, his 8th book on the subject, he proves it once more. So this book is an investigative style. It talks about specific truths that were buried, distorted, or ignored, blatant truths and calculated deceit in the Kennedy autopsy, and the fallacy of the magic bullet theory, as well as the path of conspiracy as it wove through Bethesda, FBI, Justice Department, the Office of the AG, and the presidency. So if you're interested in this book, like all the books in our series, you can find links in the show notes. I always have those. And the reason why we're reading from them is so that we can get acquainted with the verbiage and literary quality of various books. Now, one of the reasons why I chose this book rather than Whitewash to read is that the Whitewash books in their original form are literally typewritten. And so they are difficult to read, but also Robert pointed out that there are misspelled words, and it makes for an interesting reading experience. This one is much more of a classically published book. So that's part of why I chose this Weisberg book as our look for this series. But let's look at it together. In this book, it's chapter 21. The commission deceived its own dissenting members. At the time, I raised questions about the single bullet theory, really disproving it in my first book. I had not heard the rumor that a member of the commission, the respected conservative Southern Democrat, Senator Richard B. Russell of Georgia, did not believe it himself. Then, as I worked in the archives and through the FOIA sought to compel the disclosure of all the commission's executive session transcripts, I made what was to me a shocking discovery. Rankin, probably with Warren's approval, eliminated the record that Russell had made of his doubts for our history. Two other members, Senator John Sherman Cooper, a Kentucky Republican, and Congressman Hale Boggs, conservative Louisiana Democrat, shared Russell's disbelief. Boggs reportedly less vigorously than Cooper. So what he's saying is Senator Russell, Senator Cooper, and Congressman Boggs, Democrat, Republican, and conservative Louisiana Democrat, did not believe the single bullet theory. 3 of the 7 members didn't believe it. In Whitewash 4, I went into Russell's refusal to believe the single bullet theory. I discussed how Rankin and Warren conned him into signing the report anyway, based on a misrepresentation to him of the compromise they proposed, and based on my own relationship with him thereafter. Russell encouraged my efforts to disprove the Warren report until the day he died. This information obviously was readily available to anyone interested in learning the truth about the assassination and its investigations. Before presenting the official evidence, lied about and suppressed, that both disproves the single bullet theory and establishes that there had been a conspiracy to assassinate JFK, I will give an abbreviated account of my relationship with Senator Russell. I will confirm it with records from the archive of his papers he left at the University of Georgia at Athens. I will follow this with an account of how I obtained the shirt collar picture the commission did not have, and Spector should have gotten the moment he first laid eyes on FBI Exhibit 60. I had given Russell a copy of a phony stenographic transcript of the September 18, 1964 executive session, a session he had forced because of his disagreement with the single bullet conclusion of the report. There was no court reporter there, contrary to Russell's belief. So Russell had requested an executive session on September 18th, 1964. I believe that's about a week and a half before the Warren report would be published, would be printed and made official. He requested this because he disagreed with the single bullet conclusion. He thought there was a court reporter there. There was not. It was also the one time when all 7 members were in attendance. Not a word about what Russell said in objection to the single bullet theory was mentioned in the phony transcript, a fabrication of which Rankin must be responsible. He gives a quote, "Among the questions Russell had never been able to resolve in his own mind were those most significant in my work and in this January 27th transcript. He was satisfied that there had been a conspiracy, that no one man could have done the known shooting, and that, quote, we have not been told the truth about Oswald, end quote, by the federal agencies. Russell told me this as we walked from his office toward the Senate floor the morning I met with him. What's recorded here is actually really important. He says he printed the executive session transcript that had been mailed to him from the National Archives, all 85 pages of it, and he put it in Whitewash 4. Called to consider what Rankin referred to as the dirty rumor that Oswald had worked for the FBI, some of the members let their hair down. Former CIA Director Alan Dulles told his fellow members that the CIA lied and committed perjury, and that it should. John McCloy and Russell said that these agencies used some, quote, terribly bad characters, end quote. Quote, some of very limited mentalities, end quote. But the commission never did investigate these reports, and Russell shared these doubts. He was shaken by the proof that he had been imposed upon and history perverted. He asked me to conduct a further investigation to prove whether or not there still existed this transcript of the executive session on September 18th. In the Washington Post of October 11th, 1968, a small item referred to Russell's ending of his long political friendship and relationship with Johnson, confirming what Russell had told me about this. Then, it said, quote, what did not appear is that to his dying day, Russell, the most conservative of the commissioners, continued to urge me to disprove the report he had been tricked into agreeing to sign. He had told me, as I recall, that he had told Warren, quote, just put a little footnote in there at the bottom of the page saying, Senator Russell dissents. But that Warren refused, insisting on unanimity. Russell would not agree that there had been a lone assassin and no conspiracy. One change was made to entice him to agree to sign, but the specific language and the thrust of the report remained unchanged. It says exactly what Russell would not agree to, what Russell did not believe about the shooting and the wounds. Number 2, the weight of the evidence indicates that there were 3 shots fired. This is reading from the report, the parts that Russell did not agree with. Number 3, although it is not necessary to any essential findings of the commission to determine just which shot hit Governor Connally, there is very persuasive evidence from the experts to indicate that the same bullet which pierced the president's throat also caused Governor Connally's wounds. However, Governor Connally's testimony and certain other factors have given rise to some differences of opinion as to this probability, but there is no question in the mind of any member of the commission that all the shots which caused the president's and Governor Connally's wounds were fired from the 6th floor window of the Texas School Book Depository. Number 4, the shots which killed President Kennedy and wounded Governor Connally were fired by Lee Harvey Oswald. There was no such evidence from any experts, as the commission's own testimony proves, and as I exposed in the final 2 chapters of Whitewash. What is quoted above is as close as the commission came to explaining the single bullet theory, which never is mentioned as such in the report. The quotation within the excerpt is from the report's first chapter. So he's saying this is a quote from, I have mine in a purple bag right there, the Warren Commission report. And he's saying that is the section that deliberately says there is no question in the mind of any member of the commission that these things are true. And yet Senator Russell is saying, you have to put a little footnote in there, Chief Justice Warren, that Senator Russell dissents to these things. Whitewash 4 continues, it is in my belief a great tragedy that the sage and wily Russell deceived himself over the reasons that Johnson made him a commissioner. Russell told me he thought it was to keep him too busy to lead the Southern opposition to the then pending civil rights legislation. So he's saying there were Southerners who were going to mount an obstacle to the civil rights legislation. And he thought that the reason why he was appointed to the commission was to keep him too busy to actually focus on the civil rights legislation. He says, but I fooled Lyndon, Russell chortled, adding that he did lead the fight and neglected his duties as a Warren commissioner. So that's disappointing that Senator Russell was not only against the civil rights legislation, but that he's saying he did lead the fight, and then he neglected his duties as a Warren Commissioner, and that somehow that was really getting him. No, that's a disservice to our nation on both fronts. At the time Russell and I met, he knew he had emphysema. Shortly thereafter, he was found to have a cancerous lung. When he knew he was going to die, and after I gave him the proofs he wanted, he recorded his doubts publicly, if with some tact and delicacy, in a broadcast for the Cox TV network in Georgia, and privately on January 30th, 1970, in his last letter to me. Here is part of that letter. He says, "I'm interested that you are continuing your work, and there are a number of matters in the investigation which would be of interest to me if I had the time to devote to them. Unfortunately, my duties here as the chairman of the Appropriations Committee and president pro tem of the Senate simply preclude me from spending the time that would be required to do justice to any further inquiry into this complicated series of events. Fairness to the dead LBJ requires recording my belief that he had nothing to do with this deception of Russell and the destruction of the record of his doubt he thought he was making for history." Interesting. After Russell's death, the university interviewed Senator Cooper in his office on April 21st, 1971. The interviewer was Hugh Gates. Cooper's most succinct statement was that both he and Russell absolutely disagreed with the single bullet theory that is basic to the commission's report. This doubt was raised after hearing the testimony of Governor Connell, testimony that Cooper said they both felt was strong. Cooper then said, "Senator Russell just said, 'I'll never sign that report if this commission says categorically that the second shot passed through both of them.' I agreed with him." In a private letter, too, Russell was unequivocal in restating his disagreement with the basis of the commission's conclusions. He says that he reported his disagreement and asked a former commission junior lawyer, Alfreda Scobie, to try to track down the article that reported his disagreement. She was a law assistant on the staff. In her letter to Russell, Scobie said the article, of which he had heard, apparently appears on page 53 of the November 25th, 1966 issue of Life magazine. She then quoted the passage she believed that Russell had in mind. Referring to the Life article, he added, "It's not nearly as strong as the position that Senator Cooper and I took in regard to the single bullet theory. As I recall, Congressman Boggs had mild doubts, but Senator Cooper and I refused to accept the single bullet theory." There is no doubt at all. Two of the commission's members were, without any reservation at all, opposed to that part of the report that was vital to its conclusion that there was no conspiracy. A third member was also opposed, though not as strongly. This confirms the purpose of Rankin's deception of these members in at least two ways at that last-minute executive session when the presses were about to roll on the report. One is that their objections would have been incorporated in the language of the report. So that's one of the deceptions that was made, was that we're going to go ahead and record your dissent. Don't worry about it. It'll be included. Number two is that a court reporter would have been present to take down in detail their position for the historical record. Their objections were not incorporated. A court reporter was not present. While Rankin is not alive now to register any disagreement with this, he was when I first exposed his deception of Russell and Cooper at that executive session. He summarizes the problem this way. The shot that in the commission's account had to hit Connell had to be the first of the three shots. This was the only shot that could be tortured into the pretense that JFK's and Connolly's bodies could have lined up with that sixth floor Texas school book depository window to make it seem possible for that one bullet to have inflicted all 7 injuries on both men. After that moment, it was entirely impossible to pretend that the single bullet theory was within a remote possibility. The relationship of the bodies and that window changed too much as the limousine moved away from the window. The report states, There is very persuasive evidence from the experts to indicate that the same bullet which pierced the president also caused Governor Connolly's wounds. This, even Connolly and his wife disputed. There is no such evidence, persuasive or of any other kind. What actually happened is that in questioning the many doctors, Spector told each, not this bullet, any bullet, and then followed with his imagined career of his single bullet theory. What this part of the report then does is to pretend that the hypothetical responses are addressed to the real bullet, CE 399. So he's saying that when Spector was questioning the various witnesses, he would say, don't worry about if it's this bullet or not. Could any bullet do this kind of thing? And then he would describe what his perceived path of a potential single bullet could be. And doctors would say some variation of, I think that is possible. Not that pristine bullet could have done it, not getting it down to which exact wounds may have been caused. Just, is it possible that a bullet could have potentially created all 7 wounds? And so the doctors would say, I suppose it's possible. Not that they themselves perceived that this was an entry wound or an exit wound. Not that they themselves perceived that the wounds all lined up in a nice trajectory. Not that they themselves perceived that anything was in alignment. Just, is it possible? And then he would weave in his story and say, don't worry about if it's this bullet or that bullet. And then whatever was said by those physicians, they could ascribe to CE 399. Well, that is Harold Weisberg. I will say it is dense, it is thick, but when you stop and follow the train of thought that he is presenting or the line of reasoning that he's giving, it is insightful. He does have quotes, sources. He's giving exact locations that you can find the information in the Warren Report. He's giving clear information from a person who knows it. It's just dense. This is not a read aloud friendly reading, but it was worth reading. It was good to hear about the way that those men were in agreement that the single bullet theory could not be true, and yet that was not recorded. And in fact, the opposite was declared, that these men had, quote, no question in the mind of any member of the commission that all the shots which caused the president's and Governor Connolly's wounds were fired from the window, that they were fired by Lee Oswald, and that one of them had caused all the wounds between the president and Governor Connolly, except for the head wound. It's not true. It's not what was believed. And it was presented as if we are all in alignment here. Us 7, we're rock solid about this. It wasn't true at all. They were deceived. And Harold Weisberg shows us how. Well, I hope you enjoyed this reading. It was a short one, and we will finish up by smattering of the Warren Commission. Here's what happened. That's what we've done in the last few episodes and one more. Then we're going to get into the way investigators looked at the Warren Report. And then finally, Garrison. We're going to get one article about that and a look at the HSCA. And that will wrap up our look at the JFK assassination and the investigations that followed. I hope you are looking forward to those. I know I am. I'm looking forward to having a similar solid footing of what exactly happened when. I hope you're enjoying it. I hope you're still hanging in there with me. Have a great day.